Hi everybody, greetings from Sarah. I wanted to show you today how we're going to cover our boxes for our albums. So I have 3 different box covering styles to show you. So this is the same box that I'll be using. What I've done is I've just cut off all the extra flaps on the sides and that extra flap on the end that I'm going to use as a closure for my album. So just to clarify, in case you were confused about what style of box you will need for this project, you want to use a cardboard, single layer cardboard material, something like a cereal box, popcorn box. You could use a Pop-Tarts box. Granola bars are a good one as well. So basically what we're going to do is this will be the front cover of our album. This side piece will be the spine here. And then this will be the back of our album. Okay. So what I wanted to show you is 3 different versions of box coverings. So the first version is going to look something like this, where your box is going to be able to be covered by your one piece of material. So you should be able to use a 12 by 12 paper if you're doing a 4 by 6 box, with the 6 being the height of your book. You can use wrapping paper is a good option. You can also use fabric materials if you have some on hand and you're looking to use up some old scraps or something. You could even quilt something and then use it as your box cover. So the first one I'm going to show you is going to be the simplest. The second version I want to show you is the version that I will be making using our pictures of our cat. And again, my box will have this closure flap, so it doesn't fit in my 12 by 12 sheet of paper. So what I will probably do is cover the album front, spine, and back, and then use another color of cardstock to cover the enclosure. And I'm going to be showing you that in this video. And then the third style of box I wanted to show you is just a much larger box in general. So this one was taco shells, and it gives you a more squared off area to work with so that you can have vertical and horizontal pictures without having to tip your book to look at the other orientation. Okay, so again, we're going to have the front cover, the spine, and the back cover of the book. So you'll want a relatively narrow single layer cardboard box. And what you're going to do is, so this box sat like this, and it had flaps that closed it on the ends. So I just trimmed off those flaps, and I trimmed off the panel at the bottom where the box apparently was opened at the bottom. Okay, so then for this album, what I will do is split the paper in half, so it's 6 by 12 and 6 by 12. And then what I will do is cover the front edge, and then I will use a neutral color to cover the spine section. So you have the front and the back. So basically the paper will cover, like, say this much of the box, and then I'll have a black strip or a tan strip or maybe even a red strip that will go around the spine to the back side, sort of like an old book binding appearance. So because I realize that not everyone will have the same shape box, because we're all going to be reusing a box, I can't assume that you will all have perfectly shaped boxes that fit as well as mine. So you could essentially take this box and trim it down to fit this size. Okay, so you could trim off all this excess. But what fun would that be if all of our albums looked the same? So I wanted to show you, in case your box doesn't fit the same parameters as this box, which would be easy, or this box, which might be a little bit difficult. I wanted to show you a couple different ways that you can cover your album, and then you can make the choice which way to cover your album. And we can all share the different ways that we're covering our albums together. So let's get started, shall we? Okay, so like I posted on Wednesday, you're going to need a few materials in addition to the box that you have salvaged. I recommend a liquid glue. I'm using the Tombow Mono Multi Liquid Glue from Stampin' Up. You can also buy it at Michael's. The reason I'm going to use this glue is because it is a PVA style glue, and it's going to prevent my paper from warping when I try to bond my paper to my box. And it's going to give me an overall better finish, and it dries clear, which is a bonus. You'll want a paintbrush for spreading the paint thin. You'll want scissors, whichever version of scissors you prefer. I like the heavy duty ones just in case I need to trim extra off my cardboard. The paper snips give me a really precise cut. Of course, you'll need your box, a paper trimmer, your material for covering your box, and a scoring tool. And if you don't have a scoreboard like this one, but you have a paper trimmer, then you should be all set, because you can use the cutting bed on your paper trimmer right here. You can use that track to score your paper, and scoring is really optional, so you don't even have to do any scoring. So the first thing I want to do is take stock of the size of my paper and my box, and see what size I need to cut my paper down to. And I only have about a 1/2 inch of border all the way around my box with this size paper. So I'm going to trim my paper down to 7.5 inches so that I have a 1/2 inch border all the way around my box. So if you're using our Stampin' trimmer, you'll notice that there are 2 cutting blades. I always use mine sideways. You'll notice that there are 2 blades. The lighter color gray is for scoring, and you can use this one right in this tool to score. The darker one is for cutting, and this will cut your paper. Okay. All right, so the next thing I want to do is see where my score lines from the box line up on my paper, and I want to pre-score those, because when I am folding my album together and gluing it, it's going to help prevent those sections from cracking. So we want to line it up, make sure we have a 1/2 inch all the way around. And then where these score lines line up is where we want to score our paper. So right about here and right about here. So if you're using the paper trimmer to score, you can very easily mark those sections with a pencil. So like I said earlier, you may want to have an optional pencil with you. I think it was Wednesday that I posted that. Okay, so now I have some score lines so that when I'm folding my box with the wet glue, it should keep my paper from cracking. All right, moving right along here. So now you can apply your glue. So if you're using a lot of the Tombow glue, you can take the wide end off, and then you just pull the stopper. I don't use this end all that often, so. And then you can just plop the glue right onto your work surface. It's probably enough glue for the whole project. And then this is where your pencil comes in, or your paintbrush. And then you want to get that glue as evenly across the whole surface as you can. So if you're doing this project and you don't have the Tombow liquid glue, you could probably use like the gold tacky glue. You want to avoid glues that are, like, you don't want to use double-sided sticky tape because it's going to create ridges in your project, and over time those ridges are going to, if they don't show up right away, they will show up over time when you're working on the project. And they're kind of a disaster to get rid of. They don't allow your project to age well. So if you're using liquid glue and you can get it to spread evenly and equally across your project, you're going to have the best bond between your paper and your cardboard, especially if your cardboard has like a glossy surface like mine does. Okay, so I hope you can see the glue spread across the project. And then I'm just going to flip the box around and line it up in the middle of my paper. This is another reason to use liquid glue, because it gives you the opportunity to kind of shim your project around if you need to. Okay, so I'm going to put a cover on my glue before it dries out. All right, so now another thing that I recommended that you have with you when working on this project was a rubber brayer or a bone folder. And I forgot to get mine out, so I'm looking for mine while I talk, which is why my speech is all broken up. So you want to have either a rubber brayer or a bone folder, because this will allow you to make sure that you get your project bonded evenly, and you'll get all the air bubbles out. So you're going to use the bone folder to flatten out all of the air bubbles. Make sure that it's bonded evenly to your cover. Okay. At this point, you want to take a little bit of time to slowly fold your edges. Okay. And then because we did some pre-scoring, there's no cracking. Okay. And you want to take time to do this while your glue and your album cover are wet, because you have a little bit more room to play with. Okay, and then once you have it folded a little bit, you can just press it down one more time to make sure it's good and stuck. Okay. And I'm going to press from both directions. And then use my bone folder to help finalize that crease. Just hold it for a second or two on either side. And it doesn't matter which version of box you are covering, you're going to want to do these steps very carefully, because you don't want to crack your book covering on the front corners. All right, so it's looking more and more like a book every step that we take. So this is where your scissors come in. And what we are going to do is just take the corner off at an angle. You want to leave a little bit of space right at the edge so your cardboard doesn't show through. And just trim it off at an angle. And you're going to do that for all four sides. Okay. Now, this is another place your bone folder comes in handy. The next step is to fold your paper along your cardboard. This is something I like to do before I get the glue on, just because if I fold it wrong, it's not stuck down in the glue. So I always go through and I pre-fold my paper by just lifting it with my fingers and then running my finger right against the edge of the cardboard. And I'm holding that cardboard down with my bone folder. And then once I get a good crease on that, I'm going to fold it right over where it's going to be once I put the glue on. One thing I forgot to mention is you want to notch a little bit on these folds here. Just to give that fold a little room to breathe. So we're cutting right up to the score line, just cutting out a little triangle there. And you want to be careful not to cut past your cardboard, because that will be visible on the outside of your book. All right, so once we have those sections notched, then we can just fold the rest of this. And you don't have to worry about doing it all in one strip, because you've cut these little bits here. So if you don't have a bone folder to work with or something similar, you could very easily use the edge of a larger scissor or a ruler, especially if you have a metal edge ruler. That would be quite handy. And then once we get all these edges creased and folded, that's when we're going to come back in with the glue and glue these flaps down. We are almost done with this style cover. So I'm just using the narrow end of my glue because I don't need a lot of glue. I may have run out. So let's get this spread. Okay, and then I'm just again using my paintbrush to make sure I get a good thin coverage. And then now that your paper is already folded over, you can just press it right down. And then because this glue dries clear, you don't have to worry about getting outside of your glue area with the glue because it's going to be clear. And then we're going to cover the inside of the box anyway. All right, look at how nicely these corners match up. Okay, so you want to fold the long side over first, and then the short side or front and back side of your book over last, because that will give you a clean finish at the end. And then just press your air bubbles out with your bone folder. This will also give you a clean crease along the edge of your book. Okay, and then you want to slowly and carefully work on those creases a little bit. Okay, and look at that. We have a book cover. It's a little bit naked on the inside, but no worries, we're going to cover that. So that is why, in addition to your book covering materials, you'll need to have an additional piece of cardstock or material, and then we're going to trim that down to the size of the inside of our book to cover the inside. All right, so we can use the ruler on the grid paper. And our book is just shy of 11 inches. And the height of the book is 6 3/8. All right. So we're going to trim off about 1/2 inch. Of length from this cardstock because it's 8.5 by 11, and then we're going to trim off just shy of 6 3/4. Okay, and then just for giggles. Perfect. All right. All right. So the next step you'll want to do again is to score your inside cover. And this again is somewhere that a pencil will come in handy for you. Whoop. Doing all my lining up here. Right, so I know that it's about here and about here. So I'm going to place this on the board and see where that lines up. I can't see you guys, the shadow is too deep. All right. Okay, so we are going to want to line the book being right side up doesn't really matter, just particular. All right, so I'm going to pre-fold my paper so that I can line up the spine first. This is not really necessary. The way I'm about to do it is not really necessary. You can just stick it down and then fold it. But I'm finding, for my preference, that when I stick my spine first and then stick the sides, it's more balanced. Making sure to get an even coverage of the glue right to the edge. She says as she puts it on crooked twice. first. So the other reason I like to stick my spine first is because it's less daunting to just stick that middle part than it is to like stick the whole thing all at once. Okay, so your glue can easily go on this side if you're nervous about where the edges of the glue will go. And then just spread the glue evenly. Oops. My brush has dried out, guys. All right, and then make sure you get the glue right to the edge, but you want to try to keep those score lines unglued if you can. Just work the hinge a little bit. You don't want any cracking on the inside or the outside. All right. Already this is feeling a lot more sturdy than just a single layer of cardboard. Okay, so it's really important over the first 24 hours, at least the first few hours of your book's binding, to really work the hinges. You want to keep the spine flat or your spine will bow out, it will warp. Okay, so you want to get those hinges worked good. You'll start to feel them ease up. They'll be really tense at first and you'll start to feel them ease up as you work it a little more. And then once you feel comfortable with how your hinges are working, you want to try to store the book folded rather than storing it flat. So you want to put something inside of it and then something like on top and bottom. You'll want to fill the book as much as you can and then just store it flat over the next couple hours, 24 hours, depending on how soon you plan to work with the book. The next step we're going to do will be to assemble the binding for the pages of the book. And the best way to do that is when the cover has adhered and dried. So you want to try to give this at least 24 hours before working on the binding. All right, so I went ahead and did some prep work for the second album because I figured you guys don't want to see me cut the pages and score and do every step of the project for each version of the album. So what I did was, for the second and third album covers, I went ahead and pre-cut the pages and just going to show you how to assemble them at this point. So what we're going to do next is style 2, which is the square box or square album. It's not exactly a square, but it's pretty close. so that you can see what it looks like if you're going to use this kind of album. Keep in mind, you can trim this box down to a smaller width so that it does fit on the 12 by 12 paper, and you can do style 1, I'm sorry. But style 2 is going to give you more room to work with on your pages, and it is going to be your album after all. So, as I said, this started out as a 12 by 12 piece of paper, and I've trimmed the height and just cut it in half to 6 and 6-inch pieces so that we're just going to cover a portion of the album like this, and then we will use the black on the spine so that it will be an interrupted pattern. I'm just going to set these pieces off to the side and then give you an idea of what this will look like. I know I'm off the screen a bit. Okay, so when we get it all glued down, it's roughly going to look like that. And then it's just going to cover a small portion of, and then the black will cover over that. Okay, so you'll have cats on the front and cats on the back. So let's get to gluing. All right, so the first thing that I want to do is just line my paper up to my grid so that I know where I am. And this is where a pencil will come in handy for you, especially if you have a grid paper to work on. All right, so I've got 1, 2, 3 and a partial, 1, 2, 3 and a partial. Okay, so I'm going to mark right about here, and this is where my album cover ends. Okay, so I want to keep the glue in this portion here, and I'm going to have 3 and a partial and 3 and a partial for here. So I'll want to keep the glue within these pencil marks. Now, if you want, this is going to be on the inside of your album. No one is going to see it. You can just mark right on your paper too. All right, so optional pencil came in handy. And then we're going to go ahead and put the glue right on this. If it comes out. All right. And then spread it evenly with our paintbrush. These flat paint brushes are really handy, and I believe they came in a pack of watercolor paint brushes that I purchased. And they're really handy for this type of project where you want an even coating of your adhesive. All right, so it's not going to matter too much if you go outside of those lines, because we're just going to add adhesive to that part of the paper anyway, eventually. You just kind of want to focus on this portion of the paper that we're working on. And then those pencil lines that you draw will come in handy for placing your cover and getting it even. Whoops. A little bit crooked here. All right, there we go. All right, and then you'll want to use your bone folder to squidge out all of those air bubbles. There's one grumpy looking cat. All right, and then we're going to repeat it for the other side. So just like with the first one, we're going to cut the corner, and you want to leave a little tiny space at the edge of your cardboard, okay? We're just going to cut a straight line. Want to get a little closer to my cardboard than that. Okay, and you're going to do that on all four corners. And then we will want the bone folder for this. So you're just going to hold your bone folder against the cardboard and then lift with your fingers to kind of crease the paper along your cardboard. And then once you get it creased on the front edge, you just want to bring it back. And this gives us a nice pre-crease for when we glue it down in case we have any crinkles. Okay, so the next step will be the spine cover. And you can see I've already pre-scored it for you. And we're just going to adhere that part next. And then we're going to adhere this flat and then work the hinge. Be careful of the pieces of paper you've already glued down. You don't want to crease those in the wrong direction. All right. Remember, working the hinge is important when it's still wet. I got some paper on my album cover. And then work that hinge. The slower you go, the less likely you are to crack. And while it's still wet, you're less likely to crack the hinge if you work it right away. All right. Now, before we stick the black strips down, we want to cut a small triangle right out of the score line here. Be careful not to go past the edge of your cardboard because that will show up on the cover of your book. All right, so that is what the outside of our rectangle, I'm sorry, the squarish album will look like. Okay, and then you want to cover the inside, but remember, the width all the way across is too wide to fit on a 12 by 12 piece of paper. So what I've done is I used the scrap from our first album, and I'm going to just glue this down into the center here to kind of cover some of the spine. Alright, so I forgot to score this before the video, so I'm just going to use my bone folder to kind of hold that score place. Okay, so if you can see it, I'm getting some extra creasing on my page from where I didn't pre-score the paper. So if you have the chance, pre-score your paper. Need a little extra glue on this side. All right, so now once you get this inner portion covered, you can use another piece of paper and cover the rest. Work those hinges a little bit. Make sure that you have a loose enough hinge that you can use your book, but you don't want to create cracking on the outside. So, and then once you get all these layers of paper, my hands are a little sticky, I have glue on them. Once you get all these layers of paper together, it's not really as flimsy as it started out as just a box. And then you want to keep in mind too, you don't want to just pinch the edges for your binding. You want to work your binding in a way that you can keep the binding flat, because if you just pinch the edges, you create a bowing, and you don't want that to happen in your spine of your album. So keeping your album closed or folded over the first 24 or so hours to allow it to cure is really important. So you'll want to put something inside and then either place it on a desk with something on top so that it can adhere folded rather than placing it flat and then just leaving it out flat. Okay, because when you leave it out flat, the album will want to stay flat. If you leave it folded to cure while it's folded, maybe inside of another large book, it will want to stay folded. It will want to stay in shape. All right. All right. So that is style 2 of the Use a Box album, and then this was style 1. All right. Okay, so box style 3 is the one that I will be putting my cat's pictures into, and it's probably the most tedious of the album covers that we'll be making today. So I want to first start by covering this flap that we're going to use for the enclosure, because the piece that I cut myself is a little too small, and I don't like how small a space I have here, even though I've pre-scored it. So what I'm going to do is start by just folding this really tiny score line right down here. And then I'm sure you've heard me say this multiple times in the video, but pre-creasing and pre-scoring prevent cracking. Okay, so this is going to go on the outside. Okay, so I'm going to line up the grid paper just to be sure that I am straight. And I want about 2 squares worth of space on the top and the bottom of in this section here, for where I'm going to fold this back over on itself. Going off the table a bit here, guys. Sorry about that. All right, so then just like before, this corner is rounded, but I'm going to, when I fold the paper, it's going to be squared off anyway. So just like before, I just want to trim a little bit off the corners, but I don't want to go too close because it's going to fold to a pointy edge. All right, so now that we've got the flap covered, we're going to use the designer series paper to cover the rest of the front. And this is one of the insurances that I was talking about. This is a very tiny strip to leave next to a hinge. So I'm putting the designer series paper right up against that hinge there so that it starts to hold that down. And then once we get the cover all covered, then I have just an extra strip of brown cardstock that I'm going to wrap around the edges just to give it one more layer of hold. All right, so that's what the box will look like once it is an album, I guess you could say, because it won't be a box. So this is the closure flap, and then I'm going to put some Velcro or magnets under this portion in the middle here. Okay. And then I have the extra strip that we're going to add to the outside. Now let's see what we have for the inside decorations. All right. Oops, it's going to go this way. So we're going to cover the inside of the flap with this piece here. Okay, and then work those creases. And then that will be the album. with the binding system and the pages going here. All right, so I hope that you have a better idea of what kind of box you should get and maybe even what kind of binding you will be using. So this is the one with the flap. And then we have the square version. And then the simplest version. All right. So I hope you will collect a box to reuse, and I hope you will join me in this series of reusing a box to create an album. Also, be aware that Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays is when the posts for these albums will be on the page. And feel free to share your pictures of your projects in the comments of my posts. That's all for today, guys. If you stuck with me to the end, I really appreciate you. And have a great day and happy stamping.